I'm Margaret Lewis, and for 6 years I thought I knew my daughter-in-law, Emily. She seemed perfect, the ideal wife for my son, until our mason opened the walls during a renovation and found what she'd been hiding inside. Photographs, documents, secrets that would shatter everything. But before I tell you what we discovered behind those walls, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. I suppose every mother thinks she knows her children better than anyone else in the world. We carry them, raise them, watch them stumble and soar. We learn to read the smallest shifts in their expressions, the subtle changes in their voices. But what happens when someone enters their life? Someone who smiles with perfect warmth, speaks with practiced kindness, and still manages to set off alarm bells you can't quite explain. That's what Emily was to me from the very beginning, 6 years ago. When my son Ethan brought her home for the first time, I wanted so desperately to love her. Ethan's face glowed in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy opening presents on Christmas morning. She was lovely, I'll give her that. Auburn hair that caught the light just so, a smile that seemed to reach her eyes, and a softness in her voice when she called me Mrs. Lewis that felt almost rehearsed in its sincerity. "Please," I'd said, taking her hands in mine, "call me Margaret." But even then, even in that first moment, something whispered wrong in the back of my mind. It was nothing I could name, nothing I could point to and say, "There, that's it." Just a feeling, the kind my late husband Robert would have called women's intuition with that affectionate smile of his. The years passed, they married in a small ceremony in the North Carolina mountains. Emily moved into Ethan's life like she'd always belonged there, working from home as a freelance designer, making all the right gestures, Sunday dinners, thoughtful gifts, asking about my garden, but there was always something behind her eyes, a calculation, a distance, like she was performing a role she'd memorized perfectly, but never quite felt. I tried to ignore it. What kind of mother sabotages her son's happiness over a vague unease? Then Robert died, a heart attack at 67. Sudden, brutal, final. The grief hollowed me out in ways I didn't know were possible. Ethan insisted I visit more often, and I did. Their modest suburban house became a refuge from my empty home. From the silence that had replaced Robert's laughter, that's when I started noticing things. The way Emily's smile tightened when I arrived unannounced, how her eyes would dart to Ethan before she responded to my questions, as if checking whether her answers aligned with some invisible script. The phone calls she'd taken in another room, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "You're imagining things," I'd tell myself. "You're grieving and you're projecting." But mothers know deep in our bones. We know. It was a Tuesday morning in March when Emily called with news that sent ice through my veins, though I couldn't have explained why. "Margaret, we've decided to do some renovations." Her voice was bright, almost manic. "The house is beautiful, but it's from the 50s. You know how those old places are. We're opening up some walls, updating things. It'll be like a fresh start for us." A fresh start. The words hung in the air like a threat. "That sounds wonderful, dear," I heard myself say, though my hands had gone cold around my coffee cup. The house was indeed from the 1950s. Solid construction, thick plaster walls, hardwood floors that creaked with history. The kind of home that held stories in its bones. I'd always loved its warmth, its sense of permanence. But as I hung up the phone that morning, staring out at my garden where Robert had planted roses the year before he died, I felt something I couldn't shake. Dread. Deep, inexplicable dread. The walls of that house were about to give up their secrets. I didn't know what they'd been hiding, but some primal part of me understood that once those walls came down, nothing would ever be the same. I just didn't know how right I was, or how much I'd wish I'd trusted that instinct from the very beginning. The renovation began on a Monday that smelled of spring rain and fresh-cut wood. Carlos Mendoza arrived in a pickup truck that had seen better decades. Tools rattling in the bed like old bones. He was perhaps 50, with weathered hands and a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. The kind of smile that comes from genuine warmth, not performance. "Mrs. Lewis," he said when I introduced myself, shaking my hand with a firm but gentle grip. "Your son, he tell me you might come by sometimes. You are always welcome." There was something immediately trustworthy about Carlos. Maybe it was the way he looked you in the eye when he spoke, or how he took off his cap when addressing you. In a world that increasingly felt filled with masks and pretense, Carlos was refreshingly, almost achingly, real. Over the following weeks, I found myself stopping by more often than necessary. I'd bring containers of soup or fresh-baked bread, using the excuse of making sure Ethan was eating properly during the chaos of construction. But truthfully, I was watching, observing Emily's reactions when I arrived, noting the tension that would suddenly chord through her shoulders. Carlos worked with the methodical patience of someone who understood that old houses required respect. He'd tap walls, listening for hollow spaces, examining the plaster with careful fingers before making the first cut. These old homes, he told me one afternoon, dust motes dancing in the sunlight streaming through the windows. They have stories, in the walls, in the floors. People think houses are just wood and nails, but they remember things. I hadn't known then how prophetic those words would be. It was a Thursday. I remember because Ethan had mentioned that morning he'd be working late, and Emily had said something about meeting a client. I was home, folding Robert's shirts that I still couldn't bring myself to donate when my phone rang. Carlos's name flashed on the screen. We'd exchanged numbers after I'd asked him to call if he needed anything while working. Mrs. Margaret, his voice was different, lower, careful. I think you should come to the house. My heart stuttered. Is something wrong? Is Ethan? Your son is fine. He is at work. But Mrs. Margaret, I found something I think you need to see before. He paused, choosing his words with visible effort. Before Mrs. Emily comes home. The drive to their house felt endless and instantaneous all at once. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. The day had turned gray, clouds pressing down like a held breath. Carlos met me at the door, his expression grave. He held his cap in his hands, twisting it slightly, a nervous gesture that sent my pulse racing. I am sorry to call you like this, he said quietly, but I think you are a woman who sees things, who knows when something is not right. He led me through the house to the living room, where he'd been removing old plaster from the wall between the living area and what had once been a small study. The wall was half exposed now, revealing the wooden studs and the darker, older bricks beneath. But it was what lay between those bricks that made the world tilt sideways. A small rectangular compartment, carefully constructed, hidden for who knew how long, and inside it, wrapped in plastic sheeting that crinkled under the afternoon light, was a thick envelope. Carlos stood back, his eyes meeting mine with a mixture of concern and apology. I did not touch it, Mrs. Margaret, he said softly, but I thought a mother should know. My hands were already reaching forward, trembling, drawn by some terrible gravity towards secrets that had been buried in these walls, waiting all this time to be found. The plastic crinkled obscenely loud in the silence. My fingers felt numb as they peeled back layers Emily had sealed with such care. Carlos stood at a respectful distance, an anchor keeping me tethered as I unwrapped something increasingly unreal. The envelope was heavy, thick paper, water-stained along one edge, but mostly intact, protected, hidden intentionally. I opened it with trembling hands. Photographs spilled out, perhaps a dozen, glossy and professional, but these weren't recent. Edges yellowed, the quality speaking to a time before smartphone cameras. Emily stared back from every single one, but not the Emily I knew. This Emily wore designer dresses that probably cost more than my mortgage. She stood on what looked like a luxury yacht, champagne in hand. Laughing, another showed her at a gala, dripping in jewelry that caught the flash like frozen starlight. And beside her in every photo was a man I'd never seen, handsome in that polished corporate way, sharp jaw, expensive haircut, a smile that probably closed million-dollar deals. His hand rested possessively on her waist. In another they kissed, her fingers tangled in his hair. Mrs. Margaret, Carlos's voice seemed far away. Are you okay? I turned one photograph over with trembling fingers, written on the back in Emily's handwriting. They'll never know what really happened. The photograph fell, drifting to the dusty floor like a dead leaf. Inside the envelope was a small wooden box, lid carved with intricate roses. Nestled on faded velvet was a gold wedding band. I lifted it to the light. Engraved inside, Nathan. Not Ethan, Nathan. Beside the ring lay a delicate chain with a pendant, half a heart, broken jaggedly down the middle, the kind couples buy together, each keeping half. Holding this broken piece felt suddenly terribly profound. "There is something else," Carlos said quietly. At the bottom lay folded papers, bank statements, but the name was wrong. The account belonged to Emily Carter, not Emily Lewis. She'd been using another man's last name for financial transactions. And the dates. Some were from just 2 years ago, right in the middle of her marriage to my son. Carlos's hand steadied my elbow as the room tilted. Dust particles caught the afternoon light, suspended like stars. "I think maybe you should sit down, Mrs. Margaret." But I couldn't sit, could barely breathe, because in that moment, standing with evidence of my daughter-in-law's secret life, literally pulled from the walls, I understood something terrible. I had never known Emily at all, the woman who'd sat at my dinner table, who'd held my hand at Robert's funeral, who'd slept beside my son for 6 years. She was a carefully constructed lie. These photographs, this ring, these documents were fragments of her true self, hidden like bodies buried in foundations. The front door creaked open downstairs. "Carlos, are you still here? I finished early." Emily's footsteps stopped. Carlos and I locked eyes. Everything was about to change. Emily appeared in the doorway, shopping bags in hand. Her gaze went immediately to the photographs scattered across the floor, to the ring in my palm, to the envelope with its secrets exposed to light. The smile died on her face. The woman I thought I knew disappeared completely, replaced by something I couldn't read. Fear, anger, calculation, all flickering across her features like shuffled cards. "Where did you—" Her voice came out strangled. She dropped the shopping bags. "Where did you find that?" I held up the photograph. "The one of her and Nathan kissing. Inside your wall, Emily, hidden between the bricks of the house you share with my son." Her face went white. For a long moment, nobody moved. Carlos shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Then Emily's eyes met mine, and I saw something in them I'd never seen before. Not the calculation I'd suspected, not the warmth she'd performed. Pure, desperate panic. "I can explain," she whispered, but her voice held no conviction. "Margaret, please, I can explain everything." But as I stood there holding the evidence of her hidden life, surrounded by the exposed bones of her house, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever explanation she offered would be just another layer of lies. The walls had given up her secrets, and there was no going back. Carlos excused himself, footsteps heavy on the stairs. The front door closed like a cell door slamming shut. Emily and I faced each other across dust and exposed walls. Her shopping bags lay forgotten. Designer labels peeking out. Another small lie. "How long have you been lying to my son?" She flinched. The mask she'd worn for 6 years shattered, revealing someone I didn't recognize. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me, who is Nathan? Why his ring in these walls? Why use his last name?" She touched the exposed bricks where her secrets had been buried. "Nathan Carter," she whispered. "Before Ethan. I was engaged to him. Older, successful, married, but he promised." Her laugh was bitter. "They always promise. Ethan doesn't know. How could I tell him I was the other woman, that I helped destroy a family? So you lied instead." "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell everything. I wanted to start over." "By hiding evidence in walls." I gestured at the photographs. "Keeping his ring, his name on accounts. That's not starting over, that's keeping a door open." Tears streamed down her face. I felt nothing but cold certainty. "What happened to him? You said is. He's alive." She hesitated too long. "Boating accident. 3 months before I met Ethan. He went overboard in a storm. They searched but never found." She stared at nothing. "Everyone assumed he drowned." "Assumed? No body, insurance paid out. His wife got everything. I decided to bury that part of my life. I put everything in that compartment when we bought this house. Almost believable. If not for the recent bank statements. These are from last year." I held up the papers. "Long after Nathan died, after you married Ethan." Her face went white. "You're reading the dates wrong." Don't insult me. Something shifted in her expression. Calculation. Her voice hardened. What are you going to do? Tell Ethan his mother was snooping and found old photos. I'm telling him you're hiding your present, not your past. You have no proof. Maybe I never closed an old account. Maybe I kept the ring for sentiment. Everyone has old relationships. Then why hide them? Maybe I wanted something that belonged only to me, without his mother constantly judging. Her eyes hardened. You've never liked me, Margaret. The accusation stung because it was true. I had judged her from the beginning. Please. Her voice softened. Margaret, please, I love Ethan, whatever I was before. I love him. Don't destroy our marriage over my past. If you love him, tell him the truth, all of it. I can't. He'd leave me. Then you don't trust him any more than he can trust you. She turned away, shoulders shaking. What do you want from me? The truth, starting with these statements. Fine. She spun back, desperate. I kept an account, transferred money as insurance, in case Ethan and I didn't work out, in case I needed to leave. Is that what you want to hear? It wasn't the whole truth. I could feel it. I'm keeping these. I gathered the photographs and documents. If I find out you're still lying about anything, I tell Ethan everything. You can't. Watch me. I walked out, leaving her in that demolished room, surrounded by exposed bones and ruined lies. But driving home, hands shaking on the wheel, I knew this wasn't over. The walls had given up some secrets, but Emily Carter, or whoever she really was, held many more, and I would find them, even if it meant tearing down every wall she'd built, brick by careful brick. The broken heart pendant sat heavy in my pocket, its jagged edge pressing against my palm, like a warning or a promise. The week after the confrontation felt like living inside a held breath. I didn't tell Ethan, not yet. Every time I picked up the phone, the photographs spread across my kitchen table like tarot cards. My hand would freeze. How do you tell your son his wife is a stranger? Without concrete proof, I'd sound like a jealous mother-in-law spinning theories. So I waited and watched. Emily changed overnight. The warm greetings, offers of tea, careful small talk, all evaporated. She'd nod curtly when I arrived, then disappear upstairs, closing the door with a quiet click that felt louder than a slam. Ethan noticed. I think the renovation stress is getting to Emily, he told me over dinner. His face creased with worry, making him look like Robert. She's been distant, jumpy. She just says she's tired. I pushed pasta around my plate. Renovations are stressful, but I could see it. The first hairline cracks in his certainty. Carlos became my unlikely ally. He'd text me updates. Mrs. Emily, very quiet today. Or she jumped when I asked about the hallway wall. Very nervous. She is afraid, he told me at a coffee shop away from the house. Not afraid she will be caught. Afraid like she is waiting for something, or someone. You think Nathan is still in her life? Carlos nodded. These old secrets do not hide themselves so carefully unless they are still dangerous, still alive. I started driving past the house at odd hours, watching. The broken heart pendant sat in my jewelry box, its jagged edge a constant reminder. Emily had become hypervigilant, positioning herself to see doorways, checking her phone constantly, watching windows like she expected someone to appear. One evening, I arrived unannounced with groceries. Emily answered in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, looking almost vulnerable. Then she saw me, and her expression shuttered. Margaret, Ethan's not here. I know. I brought some things. May I come in? She stepped aside with obvious reluctance. The house smelled of paint and dust. I set groceries on the counter. This can't continue. Whatever is going on, I need to what? Her voice was sharp. Confess to crimes you've invented. Apologize for having a past. Help me understand. Why, so you can judge me more? Take Ethan away? You've been waiting for this since we met. I've been waiting for you to be honest. Honest. She repeated it like it was foreign. Fine. I'm scared, Margaret. Scared every single day of losing Ethan, of who I used to be, of... She stopped abruptly. Of what? Of Nathan. Her face went white. Don't say his name. Why? Because he's not as dead as you claimed. Get out. Her voice shook. Get out of my house. I left, but not before I saw it. The fear in her eyes wasn't about being caught in a lie. It was deeper, more primal. The fear of someone trapped, walls closing in, no way out. That night, I couldn't sleep. The photographs haunted me, the bank statements, the broken pendant, all pieces of a puzzle I couldn't assemble. Carlos's words kept returning. She is waiting for something, or someone, and I had the terrible feeling that whoever Emily was waiting for was about to arrive. The next morning, Carlos called, "Mrs. Margaret!" His voice was urgent. "I think you should come to the house." My heart stopped. "What did you find?" "Another compartment behind a picture in the hallway." I grabbed my keys, hands shaking. The walls were giving up more secrets, and I suspected that when they finally released them all, everything would come crashing down. I broke every speed limit getting there. Carlos met me at the door, face grave. Emily's car was gone. She'd mentioned a client meeting downtown. "Show me." He led me upstairs to the hallway. An old landscape painting lay propped against the wall, revealing fresh marks in the plaster. "I was checking walls for structural issues," Carlos explained. "This painting was covering a patch that did not match. Someone repaired this spot, but not professionally." Another compartment smaller than the first, but just as deliberately hidden. Inside was a manila folder, edges worn with handling. My hands trembled as I opened it. Bank statements showing transfers spanning 3 years. Money moving from Emily's account to various numbered accounts. Always $2,000, always on the first of the month, like clockwork. "Someone paying bills," Carlos murmured, "or paying someone to stay quiet." More documents, receipts from a PO box rental 2 hours away, renewed annually, most recently 6 months ago. But the next item made my blood run cold. A passport, Emily's photograph, but the name read Emily Jane Carter, not Emily Lewis. Carter, Nathan's surname, as if they'd been married. The issue date was 4 years ago, 2 years after she'd married Ethan. "Mrs. Margaret," Carlos said softly, "maybe we should call—" "Wait!" I held up my hand, squinting at something written in tiny script on the inside cover, a phone number written in pencil. I could just make out a Texas area code. My mind raced. Nathan supposedly died 7 years ago. Emily claimed she'd buried her past 6 years ago. But here was a passport issued 4 years ago in his name, monthly transfers for 3 years, an active PO box. Nothing added up, or it all added up to something I didn't want to believe. "Carlos, when you opened this wall, was there dust? Any sign it had been sealed for years?" He shook his head. "No, the plaster was fresh, maybe a year old, no more." A year. Emily had hidden these documents a year ago, long after she'd supposedly buried her past. She'd been actively maintaining this secret life. These connections, this other identity. I photographed everything with shaking hands, then carefully replaced the documents and sealed the compartment. "We have to make it look like we never found this," I told Carlos. "If she knows, she'll run." "Run where?" "To whoever she's been sending that money to Nathan, because I don't think he's dead at all." Carlos crossed himself, muttering a prayer in Spanish. We rehung the painting carefully. If Emily checked, and something told me she checked regularly, she'd see nothing amiss. Driving home, the photographs burning in my phone like evidence of a crime. I knew I couldn't protect Ethan anymore. The time for truth had come. That night, I called him. "Ethan, I need you to come over now. There's something about Emily you need to see." "Mom, what are you talking about? It's 9 o'clock. "Now." "Ethan, please, trust me." The change in his voice, the first note of real fear. "Is she okay? Just come." I waited. Documents spread on my dining room table like evidence at a crime scene. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mrs. Lewis," a man's voice, smooth and cultured, vaguely familiar, though I'd never heard it before. "We haven't met, but I think we both care about Emily very much." My heart stopped. "Who is this?" A pause, almost amused. "I think you know who this is, and I think we need to have a conversation about what you've been finding in those walls." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, hands frozen as headlights swept across my windows. Ethan, arriving for the truth, and somewhere out there, Nathan Carter, alive and watching, knew I'd found his secrets. The walls had given up their darkest secret. Emily's past wasn't past at all. It was present, active, dangerous, and it was about to destroy everything. I never got to show Ethan those documents that night. When he arrived, I spread the photographs across the table. Passport, bank statements, PO box receipts. I watched his expression crumble. "This can't be real," he whispered. "There has to be an explanation. Call her, ask her to come here." He dialed. It rang and rang. "She's not answering," his voice cracked. "What's going on?" I told him everything, the compartments, the confrontation, Nathan Carter, the phone call from a man who could only have been Nathan himself. With each word, I watched my son's world disintegrate. He tried calling 17 more times. Every call went to voicemail. He drove to their house, empty, dark, her car gone. He called her friends, her clients. No one had seen her since afternoon. By dawn, when her phone started going straight to voicemail as if turned off, Ethan called the police. The officer was skeptical. "Sir, it's only been a few hours. My wife has been living a double life. She has a passport in another man's name. She's been transferring money for years. This isn't someone who went out for milk." That changed things. 3 hours later, they found her car. "Mr. Lewis, we've located your wife's vehicle." The detective's voice was careful. "Near Lake Norman, about 40 miles from your residence. Parked at a scenic overlook. The driver's door was open." Ethan gripped my hand. "And Emily. No sign of your wife, but we found a piece of jewelry. A broken heart pendant on a gold chain on the driver's seat. The pendant from the hidden compartment. The matching piece to Nathan's half. We're treating this as a potential suicide situation. The overlook has a significant drop. We have divers searching." "No," Ethan stood abruptly. "She wouldn't." But I wasn't sure. Not about suicide. About whether Emily had staged it herself. Too symbolic, like a message or misdirection. Divers searched. Found nothing. No body. No evidence of anyone entering the water. Neighbors reported seeing Emily leave around 2 p.m. alone, carrying a small bag. Phone records showed 17 calls from an unlisted number in the 3 days before she vanished. The last at 1:47 p.m., 14 minutes before she left. The number traced to a burner phone last pinged off a cell tower in Texas. Texas, where that penciled phone number had been from. "We need to investigate the possibility your wife's disappearance wasn't voluntary," the detective said. "That someone may have coerced her. But I knew better. The pendant placed so carefully. The car positioned perfectly. No sign of struggle. This wasn't an abduction. Emily had walked away. A week passed, then 2. The bank accounts she'd transferred money to were registered to shell corporations with no traceable owners. The PO box had been cleaned out the day before her disappearance. Ethan was devastated. Stopped eating, sleeping. I moved in, terrified he'd follow Emily into that lake. "How did I not see it?" he'd say, staring at their wedding photo. "How did I live with her 6 years and not know who she was? Because she didn't want you to see. Some people are very good at wearing masks." 3 weeks after Emily vanished, the police made their final discovery. Nathan Carter wasn't dead. Never had been. Living in Austin, Texas, under the name Nathan Graves, he'd faked his death 7 years ago to escape fraud charges. Leaving his wife to collect insurance while he built a new identity, records showed recent money transfers from Emily's account to an account Nathan controlled. "Your wife has been helping him hide for years," the detective told Ethan, voice heavy. "We believe she staged her disappearance to join him." Ethan didn't cry, just stared with empty eyes. "She was never mine, was she? Not really. I held my son as his marriage, his trust. His entire understanding of love crumbled into dust. The walls had given up their secrets, and Emily had vanished into a past she'd never left behind." The detective arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. Exactly 4 weeks after Emily vanished into the Texas wind, I saw his car pull up through my kitchen window, an unmarked sedan that somehow screamed law enforcement. Despite its anonymity, Ethan was already at my house, having spent another sleepless night on my guest room couch. He couldn't bear to be alone anymore. Couldn't stand the silence of his apartment where every empty corner whispered accusations he aimed at himself. Detective Morrison carried a thick accordion folder, the kind that holds the weight of lives dissected into paper trails. His face was professionally neutral, but I'd learned to read the subtle tells, the tightness around his eyes, the way he gripped that folder just a little too hard, He had news, bad news, the kind that changes everything. "Mr. Lewis, Mrs. Lewis," he began, settling into my living room with the careful movements of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. "We've made significant progress in the investigation. I'm afraid what we've discovered is extensive." Ethan sat beside me, his hand finding mine like a drowning man grasping for solid ground. He'd lost so much weight that his clothes hung on him like fabric on a scarecrow. Dark circles carved shadows beneath his eyes. My son had aged a decade in 4 weeks. "Just tell us," Ethan said, his voice hollow and flat. "Whatever it is, just tell us." Detective Morrison spread documents across my coffee table, like laying out evidence at trial. Bank records, flight manifests, surveillance photographs, so many photographs, grainy security camera shots, telephoto lens captures, images that assembled into a narrative more devastating than any fiction. "Nathan Carter didn't die 7 years ago," the detective began, and I felt Ethan's hand tighten around mine. He faked his death after embezzling over $2 million from his investment firm. The boating accident was carefully staged. His business partner, a man named Daniel Reeves, was complicit, paid $300,000 for his silence and cooperation. He pulled out a surveillance photo. Nathan Carter, very much alive, captured on an airport security camera 6 years ago. The timestamp was damning, 3 months before Emily had supposedly met Ethan, by chance, at a coffee shop. "Emily knew," Ethan said, not a question, a dead flat statement of fact that made my heart break all over again. "Emily knew from the very beginning," Detective Morrison confirmed, his voice gentle but uncompromising. "In fact, Mr. Lewis, we have reason to believe she actively helped plan the disappearance. We recovered emails from a cloud storage account that Emily thought she'd deleted. The digital forensics team was able to retrieve them." He slid printouts across the table. I forced myself to read them, though each word felt like swallowing glass. "Nathan, my love, the plan is moving forward. I've established residency in North Carolina, found the perfect mark, stable job, good family, completely trustworthy. He'll never suspect." Ethan made a sound like something vital had torn inside him. "Mark," he whispered. "She called me a mark." "I'm so sorry," Detective Morrison said, and he genuinely sounded it. "The communications between Emily and Nathan date back 8 years. 2 years before she ever met you. They were lovers, partners in the fraud scheme. The plan was always for Nathan to fake his death and disappear, while Emily would establish a new, legitimate identity elsewhere and marry someone respectable," I said bitterly. "Someone who could provide cover. Yes, ma'am, your son's reputation, his career, his clean background, all of it made him the perfect alibi. Emily used her marriage to maintain legitimacy while she funneled money to Nathan over the years. More documents, more evidence of the elaborate con. Emily had been systematic, patient, methodical. She'd played the long game with the kind of discipline that would be admirable if it weren't so utterly sociopathic. The detective showed us account statements spanning 6 years, not just the $2,000 monthly payments I'd discovered, but larger transfers, tens of thousands at a time, disguised as legitimate business expenses for Emily's design work, money for equipment, contractor payments, client refunds, all fabricated, all flowing to shell corporations Nathan controlled. In total, we estimate your wife helped Nathan Carter hide and access approximately $800,000 over the course of your marriage, Detective Morrison said, each word a nail in the coffin of Ethan's old life. Money he'd stolen, carefully laundered through what appeared to be legitimate business transactions. $800,000. Ethan's voice was mechanical, processing numbers because emotions were too dangerous. Over 6 years, that's more than $130,000 a year. How did I not notice? Because she was very, very good at this, the detective said. The design business provided perfect cover, the expenses looked legitimate on paper, and you trusted your wife. That's not a failing, Mr. Lewis. That's what marriage is supposed to be built on. But Ethan wasn't listening. He'd picked up one of the emails, was reading it with a kind of horrified fascination. Counting down the days until we're together again, my darling. This charade is killing me, but it will be worth it. Just a little longer. Just a few more years of playing house, and then Texas, and then forever. I love you, always have, always will, E. Playing house? Ethan read aloud, his voice cracking. 6 years of my life, and she called it playing house. Detective Morrison pulled out his phone, showed us a text message thread. These are from burner phones, but we managed to retrieve them. 3 weeks before her disappearance, Emily wrote, "It's time. I can't keep living this lie. I'm ready to come home to you." Nathan's response was, "Austin is ready for you, my love. Our house is ready. Our life is ready. Just walk away and come home." Our house, our life, as if the home Ethan had bought, the life they'd supposedly built together, had been nothing but a temporary shelter, a way station on Emily's journey back to the man she'd loved all along. That pendant, I heard myself ask, my throat tight, the broken heart she left in the car, was that theirs? Yes, ma'am. The detective pulled out another photo. Nathan's apartment in Austin, before he'd fled. Clean, modern, expensive, despite his supposed fugitive status. And there on his dresser, displayed like a sacred relic, was the other half of that broken heart pendant. They bought matching halves 8 years ago, before the fraud scheme even began. Their promise that they'd find each other again, no matter what. Witnesses we've interviewed said Nathan wore his half every day, never took it off. Ethan stood abruptly, walked to the window. His shoulders shook with silent sobs that he was trying desperately to contain. I wanted to go to him, but something held me back. Some understanding that he needed this moment to shatter completely before he could begin to rebuild. Did she ever love me? His voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear it. At all, even a little, even in the beginning. Detective Morrison hesitated. I could see him weighing truth against kindness, trying to decide which would hurt less. The communications suggest she struggled with the deception, he said finally. In several messages she expressed guilt. In one she wrote, "He's a good man. He deserves better than this. Sometimes I wish I could just tell him the truth and walk away clean." But she didn't. Ethan turned, and his face was ravaged. She didn't tell me. She didn't walk away clean. She just kept lying day after day, year after year, sleeping next to me, letting me love her, letting me plan a future that she knew would never happen. No. Son, she didn't. Did she laugh about me? Ethan's voice rose, anger finally breaking through the shock. Did she and Nathan laugh about the stupid, trusting husband? Did they joke about how easy I was to fool? There's no evidence of that, the detective said quickly. The communications suggest she saw you as collateral damage, necessary, but regrettable. Oh well, that's so much better. Ethan laughed, and it was the most terrible sound I'd ever heard. I wasn't a joke. I was just collateral damage, necessary but regrettable, like civilian casualties in a war. I didn't even know I was fighting. Detective Morrison gave him a moment, then continued. We've tracked Emily and Nathan to Austin, but by the time local authorities arrived at the address, they'd already moved on. We believe they're using new identities, probably their 3rd or 4th iteration by now. These are people who've been planning this for years. They're good at disappearing. What about the money? I asked. Can you trace it? Some of it, but most of it's been moved through so many shell corporations and offshore accounts that recovery will be difficult. We've frozen what we can, but Carter was smart. He's been preparing for this for a long time. Will you find them? Ethan asked. Eventually. People like this always make mistakes. They get comfortable. Sloppy. We've issued federal warrants. Wire fraud, conspiracy, insurance fraud, identity theft. The FBI has taken over the investigation. If they surface anywhere with these identities, we'll get them. And if they just create new identities, new names, new lives. Detective Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then it becomes much harder, but we don't stop looking. After he left, Ethan and I sat in the wreckage of evidence scattered across my coffee table. Proof that everything he'd believed about his life had been fiction, a carefully constructed fantasy performed by a woman who'd never been his wife in any way that mattered. I keep thinking about small moments, Ethan said finally, his voice raw. The way she'd smile when I came home from work, how she'd kiss me goodbye every morning and say, "I love you." The way she'd curl up next to me at night and put her head on my chest. He looked at me with devastated eyes. Were those real, any of them? Or was I so desperate to believe in love that I convinced myself I saw it? I don't know, sweetheart, I said honestly. Maybe some of it was real in the moment. Maybe she did feel affection for you, in her own limited way. But love, I shook my head. Real love doesn't manipulate. Real love doesn't use. Real love doesn't build a life on someone else's trust just to hollow it out from the inside. How do I come back from this? Mom? His voice broke completely. How do I ever trust anyone again? How do I ever believe in love when the person I trusted most in the world was lying to me every single day for 6 years? I pulled him into my arms like he was 5 years old again, and he finally let himself cry. Great, racking sobs that shook his entire body. The grief of a man who'd lost not just his wife, but his entire understanding of what his life had been. You come back by remembering that her choices don't define your capacity to love, I whispered. By understanding that what she did says everything about her and nothing about you. By letting yourself grieve and heal, and eventually, when you're ready, letting yourself trust again. I don't know if I can. You will, I promised. Though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. You will because you're stronger than you know, and because the alternative, living in fear and suspicion forever, would mean letting her win. The walls had finally revealed everything. The full scope of Emily's betrayal, the calculated cruelty of a love that had never existed, and now, somehow, we had to figure out how to build something real from the ruins she'd left behind. Time. They say heals all wounds, but I learned during those long months after Emily's betrayal was fully exposed that time doesn't heal. It just teaches you how to carry the weight of your scars with more grace. The first weeks were the hardest. Ethan couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function. He'd call me at 3 a.m., voice hoarse and broken, asking questions that had no good answers. Do you think she ever thought about me after she left? Do you think she feels guilty? Do you think Nathan was better in bed than me? And that's why... Stop, I'd interrupt gently but firmly. Don't torture yourself with comparisons. Don't give her that power. But grief doesn't follow logic. It spirals and circles back, attacking from different angles each time you think you've made peace with it. Ethan couldn't stay in the house he'd shared with Emily. Every room held ghosts. The kitchen where she'd made coffee every morning. The bedroom where they'd shared a bed for 6 years. The office where she'd sat conducting her elaborate fraud while he'd believed she was working on legitimate design projects. The walls themselves seemed to whisper accusations. How did you not see? How did you not know? We put the house on the market within 6 weeks. Carlos finished the renovation with his characteristic quiet efficiency, never once asking about Emily or the investigation. He understood instinctively that some stories are too raw to retell, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is simply work in silence and let your presence be the comfort. The house sold within 3 days of listing, remarkably fast, almost suspiciously so. The new owners were a young couple with a toddler and another baby on the way. They loved the updates Carlos had made, talked excitedly about raising their family there. I wondered if they could feel the history in those walls, the secrets that had been buried and excavated, but their enthusiasm was untainted by knowledge, and I was grateful for that. The house deserved a fresh start, even if we couldn't have one quite so easily. Ethan moved into a small apartment downtown, one of those modern lofts with exposed brick and industrial fixtures, clean lines, minimal furniture, nothing that carried memory or meaning. It looked more like a hotel room than a home, but that was intentional. He was creating a blank slate, a space with no history to haunt him. I visited every day at first, bringing food he wouldn't eat and company he barely tolerated. But gradually, slowly, color began returning to his face. His appetite crept back in small increments. First he'd manage half a sandwich, then a whole meal. Then finally, one day I arrived to find him cooking for himself. I started therapy, he told me 3 months after Emily's disappearance. We were having coffee at his apartment, sunlight streaming through the industrial windows. Dr. Chen. She specializes in trauma from intimate betrayal. How is it? I asked, relieved he was taking this step. Hard. He stirred his coffee with mechanical precision. Really hard. She makes me talk about things I'd rather bury. She has this term, betrayal trauma. Says it's different from regular trauma because the wound comes from someone you trusted completely. Someone who was supposed to protect you, not destroy you. That makes sense. She says I need to grieve, not just the person I lost, but the person I thought existed, like I'm mourning someone who never actually lived. Emily, the Emily I knew, was essentially fiction, a character she played, and I fell in love with a ghost. His words broke my heart, but they also showed progress. He was beginning to intellectualize the pain, to create frameworks for understanding what had happened to him. That was healthy, Dr. Chen would later tell me. That was healing. The worst part, Ethan continued, staring into his coffee like it held answers, is that I can't trust my own memories anymore. I'll remember something. Her laugh when I told a bad joke, the way she'd hum while cooking dinner, how she'd reach for my hand when we watched movies, and I don't know if those moments were real, if that was actually her, or if it was all just performance, strategic gestures to maintain the illusion. Maybe some of it was real, I offered gently. People are complicated, even people who do terrible things. Maybe in those small moments she did feel genuine affection. Maybe she did enjoy your company, even if she didn't love you the way you deserved. You're being more generous than she deserves. I'm being realistic. She's not a cartoon villain, Ethan. She's a person who made monstrous choices. That somehow makes it worse, knowing that she was capable of human feeling but chose to betray you anyway. He nodded slowly, processing. Dr. Chen says I need to forgive myself for not seeing it, for trusting her, for being naive, I guess. You weren't naive. You were in love. Those are different things. Are they? Because right now they feel exactly the same. Carlos became an unexpected lifeline during those difficult months. He'd stop by Ethan's apartment unannounced, bringing containers of tamales, or pozole, that his wife Rosa had made. He'd sit with Ethan for hours, often in comfortable silence, occasionally sharing stories from his own life. One evening, about 4 months after Emily vanished, Carlos told us about his immigration from Mexico 30 years ago, how he'd left behind his entire family, crossed the border with nothing but hope and determination, worked construction jobs that paid under the table until he could establish legitimate residency, how he'd sent money home every month for years, supporting parents and siblings he might never see again. I understand, Carlos said quietly, his weathered hands wrapped around a beer. What it is to build a life on hope, to trust in something better. Sometimes that trust is rewarded. Sometimes, he shrugged, sometimes it is not. But we cannot stop trusting completely, or we stop living. How do you know who to trust? Ethan asked, and I heard the desperation in his voice, the fundamental question that haunted him. You don't, Carlos said simply. Not for certain, but you pay attention. You listen not just to words, but to actions. You watch for consistency, and when you find someone whose words and actions align, whose face in private matches their face in public, you hold on to them. And if you're wrong again, then you were wrong. But at least you were brave enough to try. The alternative, living in fear, suspecting everyone, trusting no one, that is not life, my friend. That is just existence. Simple wisdom from a man who'd lived a complicated life, but it resonated with Ethan in ways my more elaborate reassurances never had. Slowly, incrementally, Ethan began rebuilding. He requested a transfer within his engineering firm, moving to a different division where no one knew about Emily or the scandal. He started running in the mornings, joined a gym, began taking care of his body again. He reconnected with friends he'd lost touch with during his marriage, guys from college, former co-workers, people who knew the Ethan that existed before Emily. And gradually, carefully, he started to smile again. Not the haunted half-smile of someone pretending to be okay, but genuine expressions of contentment, small joys returning to his life like birds after a storm. 5 months after Emily vanished, Ethan volunteered at a community literacy program. He'd always loved reading, had talked about tutoring someday when he had time. Now he had time and a desperate need to fill it with meaning. That's where he met Sarah. She was a kindergarten teacher, bright-eyed, quick to laugh, with a warmth that seemed to radiate from her naturally, rather than being performed. She ran the literacy program, organized volunteers, knew every student by name and circumstance. When Ethan told me about her after their first volunteer session, his voice had a quality I hadn't heard in months, lightness. She's really dedicated, he said, trying to sound casual and failing completely. The program, she's been running it for 3 years. All volunteer. She just really cares about kids learning to read. She sounds lovely. She is? He paused. We're getting coffee on Friday, just as friends, just to talk about the program. Of course, just as friends, he smiled, actually smiled, at my tone. Don't get ahead of yourself, Mom. But I could see it already, the way his face had lit up when he talked about her. The hope creeping back into his eyes despite his attempts to guard himself. Their just as friends coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into a second date. A third. By the fourth date, Ethan finally told her about Emily, the whole devastating story. He'd been terrified of her reaction, convinced she'd run from the drama, from a man so clearly damaged. Instead, Sarah had listened without judgment, held his hand, and said simply, "Thank you for trusting me with that. I know how hard that must have been." She didn't try to fix him, didn't offer platitudes about time healing all wounds, didn't compare his situation to anything else, or try to minimize his pain. She just accepted his history as part of who he was, and continued to show up. I met Sarah 6 months after Emily vanished. Ethan brought her to Sunday dinner at my house, and I watched them together with a mother's careful scrutiny, looking for signs of performance, of calculation, of anything that reminded me of Emily. But Sarah was so fundamentally different. Where Emily had been polished and careful, Sarah was spontaneous and slightly messy. Where Emily had performed warmth, Sarah radiated it naturally. Unconsciously, she laughed too loud at bad jokes. She had paint under her fingernails from a classroom art project. She asked questions that showed genuine curiosity rather than strategic information gathering. When she helped me with dishes, she said quietly, "I know you're protective of him. I would be too, after what he went through. I just want you to know, I'm not in a hurry. We're taking this as slow as he needs. And if he ever needs space, I'll give him that too. I'm not going anywhere." I hugged her then, this woman I barely knew, and whispered, "Thank you." Carlos and his wife Rosa became integral to our healing. They invited us for Sunday dinners when I wasn't cooking. Loud, warm gatherings filled with extended family, home-cooked Mexican food, and the kind of unconditional acceptance that asked nothing in return. Rosa would kiss Ethan's forehead and call him Mijo, my son, and I'd watch some of the hardness leave his eyes. The investigation into Emily and Nathan continued in the background, but they'd vanished completely. New identities, new city, always moving. The FBI assured us they'd surface eventually. People like that always made mistakes, got comfortable, slipped up, but weeks turned into months with no news. Sometimes I wondered if Emily thought about Ethan, if she felt guilt for the years she'd stolen, for the trust she'd shattered, if she ever woke up in the night thinking about the devastation she'd left behind. But mostly, I chose not to think about her at all. She'd had enough of our time, our energy, our emotional space. We were taking it back now, reclaiming our lives from her shadow. 8 months after that terrible day when Carlos first opened the wall and changed everything. Ethan brought Sarah to Sunday dinner at my house. We cooked together, the 3 of us laughing over something silly, moving around each other with easy familiarity. Sarah was telling a story about one of her students, her hands animated, her face bright with affection for the children she taught. I caught Ethan's eye across the kitchen. He was watching Sarah with an expression I recognized, not the desperate, clinging need he'd had with Emily, but something quieter, steadier, real. He looked happy. Not the performance of happiness, but genuine contentment, lighter, freer, like he'd finally set down a weight he'd been carrying for so long. He'd forgotten it wasn't part of him. Later, as Sarah helped pack leftovers and Ethan loaded the dishwasher, he pulled me aside. "Thank you, Mom," he said quietly, "for not giving up, for seeing what I couldn't, for..." He paused, emotion thickening his voice, "for saving me from wasting even more years of my life on a lie. That's what mothers do," I said simply. "We see, we protect, even when it hurts, even when we're not sure we're right." The walls had revealed their secrets and torn apart everything we thought we knew. But from those ruins, slowly and painfully, we were building something true, something honest, something built on trust that was earned rather than performed, and while the scars would always remain, we were learning to carry them with grace, learning that survival isn't just about making it through the devastation. It's about believing, despite everything, that love, real love, is still possible. The letter arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning, 11 months after Emily vanished into her carefully constructed new life. I almost threw it away with the junk mail. It sat there among credit card offers and grocery store flyers. A plain manila envelope with my name and address printed in generic block letters. No return address, no indication of what it contained or who had sent it. But something made me pause, envelope in hand, as morning light streamed through the kitchen window Robert had always loved. The window where I'd stood so many times over the past year, processing grief and betrayal and the slow, difficult work of healing. The envelope had weight, not just physical weight. Though it was heavier than it should have been for its size, it carried presence, significance, like it contained more than paper and ink, like it held ghosts. My hands trembled as I opened it, standing at my kitchen counter with coffee growing cold beside me. Inside was a single photograph. For a moment I couldn't process what I was seeing. My brain refused to assemble the image into meaning, rejected the reality of what my eyes were showing me, Emily and Nathan, standing together in front of a small ranch-style house, not the sleek, modern apartment in Austin where the FBI had tracked them, but something simpler, humbler. The house behind them was modest, weathered wood siding, a small porch with rocking chairs, a garden that looked lovingly tended, and beyond them, stretching to the horizon, was wide-open Texas sky, blue and endless and empty. They were smiling, both of them, not the calculated, careful smiles I'd seen in those hidden photographs from years ago, the ones that spoke of expensive restaurants and stolen moments, and a love that existed in shadows. These smiles were different, softer, almost peaceful, content. Emily looked transformed. Her auburn hair, which she'd always worn long and carefully styled, was shorter now, lighter, sun-bleached maybe, or deliberately dyed. She wore simple clothes, jeans, and a plain white t-shirt. Nothing designer, nothing expensive, no jewelry except what looked like a simple gold band on her left hand. She looked ordinary, like someone who shopped at Target and did her own gardening and lived a quiet, unremarkable life. Nathan had his arm around her waist, casual, comfortable, proprietary, the gesture of a man who no longer had to hide his relationship, who could finally claim publicly what had been secret for so long. He looked older than in the hidden photos, grayer, but also more relaxed, like he'd finally stopped running. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the photograph, but I forced myself to turn it over, somehow knowing before I saw it that there would be words on the back, written in handwriting. I recognized, despite the months that had passed, despite everything that had happened since I'd last seen Emily's careful script, were words that made my breath catch in my throat. Now you understand. Sometimes love needs to be buried before it can bloom again. I'm sorry for the pain, but not for the choice. We finally have what we always wanted. I hope, in time, you can find peace with that. Tell Ethan I'm sorry, but not sorry enough to give this up. I read the words 3 times, 4, trying to find in them some hint of remorse, of genuine regret, of understanding about what she'd done. But all I found was justification, rationalization, the self-centered logic of someone who'd convinced herself that her happiness justified any amount of collateral damage. Sorry for the pain, but not for the choice. As if that distinction mattered. As if her regret over our suffering could somehow balance against her utter lack of regret for causing it. As if saying, I'm sorry you're hurt, was the same as, I'm sorry I hurt you. But even as anger rose hot and fierce in my chest, even as I wanted to tear the photograph into pieces and burn the fragments, I found myself studying it again, looking past the obvious, the proof of her betrayal, the visual confirmation of her new life with Nathan, to something else underneath. She looked happy, genuinely, honestly happy, not performing happiness for an audience, not calculating her expressions for strategic effect. This was someone who'd finally stopped running, stopped hiding, stopped playing parts for other people's benefit, Someone who'd gotten exactly what she wanted regardless of the cost to everyone else. Part of me hated her for that happiness, hated that she could destroy my son's life, shatter his ability to trust, steal 6 years from him and then just move on, build a new life, smile for photographs like none of it mattered, like it was all just necessary steps on her journey to this modest house with this man she'd loved all along. But another part of me, a quieter part, one that had spent 11 months watching my son slowly piece himself back together, wondered if maybe this was better, if her genuine happiness with Nathan meant that at least some part of what she'd felt for Ethan had been real, even if it was never love, if her contentment in this photograph meant my son hadn't wasted 6 years on someone who was miserable every moment, who spent every day counting down until escape. I don't know how long I stood there, photograph in trembling hands, cycling through anger and grief and confusion, and a strange, unwelcome hint of something that might have been relief. Relief that she was gone, that she was someone else's problem now, that we could move forward without wondering if she'd ever come back. The morning sun had moved significantly across my kitchen floor when I finally called Carlos. He arrived within an hour, taking one look at my face and immediately putting on coffee without asking if I wanted any. Rosa had taught him that wisdom. Sometimes the only thing you can offer someone is warmth and presence and the ritual of ordinary actions in the face of extraordinary circumstances. She sent this, I said. Sliding the photograph across my kitchen table, Carlos studied it carefully, his weathered hands gentle as he held the evidence of Emily's new life. He took his time, examining the house, the sky, the careful details of the image. Then he turned it over, read the words Emily had written, and was quiet for a long moment. "What will you do?" he asked finally, setting the photograph down and wrapping his hands around his coffee mug. "I don't know." My voice sounded hollow, even to myself. Part of me wants to show this to the police immediately, to give them this lead, to make her face consequences for what she did. And the other part wants to protect Ethan. He's just starting to heal, Carlos. Just starting to believe he can trust again, that he can build something real with Sarah. If I show the police this photograph, it becomes news again. It brings everything back. The questions, the investigation, possibly a trial if they catch her. All of that trauma relived in public. Carlos nodded slowly, his dark eyes understanding. In Mexico, we have a saying, "El que busca venganza debe cavar 2 tumbas." He who seeks revenge should dig 2 graves. I'm not seeking revenge, I protested. But even as I said it, I wondered if that was true. I'm seeking justice. There's a difference. Maybe, Carlos said carefully. Or maybe, he gestured to the photograph. Maybe she is already living with her choices. Every day. She lives knowing what she destroyed, what she gave up, what she did to a good man who loved her. Is that not its own kind of punishment? She doesn't look very punished, I said bitterly, stabbing a finger at her smiling face. No, she looks happy, but happiness built on ashes. He shook his head. I do not think it is the same as happiness built on truce, and she will always know the difference, even if she pretends not to. That's very philosophical, but it doesn't feel like enough. No, Carlos agreed. Probably it does not feel like enough, but the question is not what feels like enough to you, Mrs. Margaret. The question is, does Ethan deserve to have his peace disturbed? Does making her pay change what happened? Does it give him back the 6 years she took? I had no answer to that, because the answer was no. Nothing could give Ethan back those years, that trust, that innocence. Punishing Emily wouldn't heal the wounds she'd inflicted. It would just keep them open, raw, bleeding. That evening, after hours of internal debate, I made a decision. I showed Ethan the photograph, not because I'd decided what to do with it, but because he had the right to choose for himself. This was his life, his trauma, his decision. He stared at the image for a long time, face unreadable. I watched emotions flicker across his features. Anger, pain, something that might have been longing, finally settling into a kind of resigned acceptance. Then he handed it back to me without looking at the message on the back. She looks happy. He said simply, "Yes," I confirmed. "She does. Good." He met my eyes, and I was surprised by what I saw there. Not rage, not devastation, just tiredness. I hope she is happy, Mom. I genuinely hope that every day for the rest of her life She's blissfully, contentedly happy with Nathan, because that means I didn't waste 6 years on someone who was miserable every moment. It means at least some part of what she felt was real, even if it wasn't for me. Even if I was just a convenient placeholder until she could get back to him. You're being more generous than she deserves, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I'm not generous? I'm exhausted, he smiled. But it was sad around the edges. I'm so tired of being angry, Mom, of feeling like a victim, of letting what she did define who I am. She made her choice. She gets to live with it, and I get to live with mine, which is choosing to move forward instead of backward. What about justice? I pressed. Don't you want her to face consequences? Justice, he laughed. But there was no bitterness in it anymore, just resignation. She's living in hiding, Mom, using a fake name, always looking over her shoulder, never able to build anything truly stable because it's all based on lies that could collapse at any moment. Never able to have real friends who know her actual history. Never able to put down roots or have children. Because how do you explain to kids why they can't know their grandparents or why Mommy's name keeps changing? He shook his head. That sounds like justice to me. Maybe not the justice of a courtroom and a sentence, but justice nonetheless. She got what she wanted, but at a cost she'll pay every single day. We talked for hours that night, processing the photograph and Emily's message and what it meant for us moving forward. Ethan told me about his therapy sessions, about the work he'd been doing to rebuild his ability to trust, about Sarah, who'd been endlessly patient with his fears and his need to take things slowly. She's nothing like Emily, he said. I used to think that was because I was traumatized, because I was comparing everyone to the worst experience of my life, but now I understand. She's nothing like Emily because she's genuine. What you see is what you get. Her face in private matches, her face in public. She doesn't calculate her responses, she just is. Herself, fully, honestly herself. That must be terrifying, I said gently. To trust again. It's the most terrifying thing I've ever done, he admitted. Every day, I have these moments where my brain screams that I'm being fooled again, that I'm missing signs, that everyone is lying. But then I look at Sarah, and I see someone who has nothing to hide, and I choose, actively choose, to trust that, to believe in it, because the alternative is living in fear forever, and I refuse to give Emily that much power over my future. Later, after Ethan left, I stood in my garden where Robert had planted roses 5 years before his death, the same garden where I'd once felt that first sense of dread about Emily's renovation announcement, where I'd known somehow that opening those walls would change everything. I held the photograph over the small fire pit I used for burning yard waste, watching flames catch and curl the edges of the paper. Emily's smile blackened and disappeared. Nathan's face crumbled into ash. The modest house, the Texas sky, the visual evidence of their new life, all of it reduced to smoke rising into the evening air. Maybe it was the right choice. Maybe it wasn't. I might never know for certain, but as I watched the last remnants burn away, I thought about what Carlos had said, about houses holding secrets, but those secrets not defining them, about finding cracks and repairing them and making structures strong again. Ethan was doing that now. He and Sarah were building something honest, something based on truth and genuine feeling. They'd painted his apartment together last weekend, warm colors replacing the sterile whites he'd chosen in the immediate aftermath of Emily's betrayal. They'd filled the space with plants and books and photographs of actual moments they'd shared, building a life together, one authentic moment at a time. And me, I was learning to let go of anger, of the need for revenge, of the belief that justice always looks like punishment, of the idea that closure comes from external sources rather than internal peace. The ashes scattered on the wind, carrying Emily's final message away into the Texas sky that separated us now and forever. I went inside and called my son, not to tell him I'd burned the photograph. He didn't need to know that detail, just to hear about his day, to listen to him laugh about something Sarah had done, to remind myself that some endings are also beginnings, and some losses clear space for better things to grow. The walls had given up their secrets and torn apart everything we thought we knew. The investigation had revealed the full scope of the betrayal, The calculated cruelty of a love that had never been real, but we'd survived, we'd rebuilt, and we'd learned something. Emily, for all her careful planning and strategic thinking, would never understand that love, real love, doesn't hide in walls or live in secrets. It grows in daylight, it's built on truth, and it's strong enough to withstand even the cruelest betrayals. The house that had held Emily's secrets had been sold, renovated, filled now with a new family's laughter and light, new memories being made in spaces that had once held lies, and we had built something stronger from its ruins, something honest, something real, something that would last, not because it was perfect, but because it was true.